The dock workers' strike that threatened the American supply chain weeks before our election is over today. And that is good news for consumers who were bracing themselves for rising prices at the grocery stores. The union that represents tens of thousands of East Coast dock workers and the shipping industry reached a tentative agreement on wages and are extending their contract through 2025. The Israeli military issued evacuation warnings today for a further swath of towns and villages in southern Lebanon, where its troops are fighting Hezbollah militants as Lebanese health officials raised the death toll from an Israeli strike near the heart of Beirut to at least 9 people. And former President Donald Trump has never stopped propagating falsehoods that the 2020 presidential election was stolen from him. But now he is increasingly turning his attention to preemptive claims that the 2024 election is being rigged to prevent him from returning to the White House. Now, of course, Trump has not provided any actual evidence of cheating and no specific allegations related to illegal efforts by Americans to tamper with the November election. And Sharice Lane, a senior at Florida A&M University in Tallahassee, Florida, wants to reestablish what would be the only active chapter of college Republicans at a historically Black college or universities. She says there's just one roadblock. She can't find an advisor for the group to be recognized on campus. The College Republican National Committee, which has been around since 1892, that is an unofficial affiliate of the Republican National Committee. And although the group has 2,000 campus affiliates across the country, well, there are 100 HBCUs in the U.S., and none of them are home to any college Republican club. And Tim Walz will participate tonight at a virtual event with a major Muslim group to address the critical issues that matter most to Muslim American communities, both domestically and globally. And the Harris campaign today announced the launch of Wisconsin Republicans for Harris. Now, this was ahead of Harris's on-stage appearance in Ripon, Wisconsin, with former Republican Congresswoman Representative Liz Cheney. Now, this Republican Wisconsin group is led by more than 20 former state officials, all Republican, including some Republican county party chairs. And Republicans are feeling the heat because they're about to have some additional spending done by a Republican super PAC on House races. They are targeting California and Arizona because those House races in those two states have slim majorities. And they are hoping, the Republicans, that is, are hoping to pick up some Democratic-held seats that would give them an opportunity to maintain control of the House. And in case you are wondering about what happened at that trial involving the former officers that were charged with the beating death of Tyree Nichols, the jury came in today, and some shocking news, did not find the 3 former officers guilty on the serious civil rights charges, civil rights violations that led to the death of Tyree Nichols. All 3 of the former officers were acquitted on those charges. Now, the 3 officers were found guilty on lesser witness tampering charges. Those charges do carry penalties up to 20 years, but those are the lesser, not the most serious charges that these former officers faced. We're going to talk more about that later in the show, but that is the news of the day, and this is Areva Martin in real time, and I'm your host, Areva Martin. This is your one-stop destination for today's trending news, expert analysis, and my unfiltered opinions. This is hour 2, and because it's hour 2, we're going to go a little deeper, dig behind some headlines, and bring you the news that people are talking about. And everyone, I think, is going to be talking about this shocking development in the Tyree Nichols trial. I had been watching the trial very carefully. I'd reported on this show my dismay that it wasn't getting enough national news coverage, and we definitely did our part to try to keep fresh in the public's mind the officer involved, the trial involving these 3 former officers. If you will recall, we saw horrific video footage from police officers' body cam, from other video that was released by the city of Memphis showing how 29-year-old Tyree Nichols, a Black man, suffered a horrific beating after a traffic stop by officers, all who were members of this so-called Scorpion unit. This happened on January 7th, January 7, 2023. Mr. Nichols was taken to a hospital after what seemed like hours of police standing around making jokes about him and trying to get their story straight. And then he died 3 days later. We watched, again, that horrific beating of Mr. Nichols. We're glad to see federal federal prosecutors, the U.S. Attorney's Office, come in and charge these officers. And like I said, from what I saw in this trial, I fully expected to see convictions across the board. But that didn't happen today. And sometimes we have to scratch our heads when juries come back with verdicts that don't seem to make sense or don't seem to be consistent with what the evidence that was presented. But in our nation, we have to accept our jury process. We know how difficult it is to get folks to even serve on juries. A lot of people get their jury summons, they throw them in the trash, they come up with excuses. But the jury process is a very, very, very important part of our judicial system. It is the bedrock of our system. So I'm reluctant to be too critical of those jurors. But this was a mixed verdict. This was a mixed verdict that's coming almost 2 years after Mr. Nichols was beaten to death. Again, that beating just sickened us in some ways, in the same way that watching George Floyd get beat by police. You know, we remember that visceral response we had to watching that. Watching Tyrese Nichols invoke some of those same feelings. Now, the sentencing of these officers, former officers, will occur sometime later. And again, these are serious charges that they were convicted of. They carry up to 20 years in a federal prison. And these former officers have to go and be held accountable in state court where they face second-degree murder charges. Veteran prosecutor Bobby Grace, a regular legal contributor on this show, is going to join me when we come forward to help us make sense of this jury verdict, because it's not making sense to me as a civil rights lawyer, as someone who has watched this trial religiously. So I'm grateful that Bobby took time out of his busy schedule to help us understand what the jury decided in this case. So when we come forward, more on the Tyree Nichols jury verdict with veteran prosecutor Bobby Grace. Stay with us.
You're listening to Areva Martin in real time on KBLA Talk 1580.
Always night pads are designed for a perfect night's sleep, so you can do your bear hugging a pillow thing, your free falling starfish thing, your burritoed in a blanket with the AC blasting thing. While Always night pads with rapid dry do there, we've got your back with fast absorbency and up to 10 hours of protection thing. So while your period's doing its own thing, Always lets you do your sleep thing. Shop for Always in-store or online, wherever you get your pads.
Febreze. As a rideshare driver, I love keeping my car smelling fresh and clean. So when I'm driving, I only trust new Febreze car vent clips, now with 3 times greater scent control, because it's that little touch that sets me apart. I can turn the intensity down for subtle freshness, or I can turn it up for when I want lots of scent. So whether it's set to low, medium, or high, with new Febreze car, I know my car's going to smell amazing, which keeps my driver rating right where it belongs. Picking up! Oscar!
If you love to travel, Capital One has a rewards credit card that's perfect for you. With Venture X, earn unlimited double miles on everything you buy and turn everyday purchases into extraordinary trips. Plus, receive premium travel benefits like access to over 1,300 airport lounges where you just check in and chill out. Open up a world of possibilities with Capital One. What's in your wallet?
Terms apply. Lounge access is subject to change. See CapitalOne.com for details.
KBLA Talk 1580. We've got a lot to talk about.
KBLA Talk 1580, connecting you with services and solutions. Legal Aid Foundation of Los Angeles is a nonprofit law firm that protects and advances the rights of the most underserved, leveling the playing field and ensuring that everyone can have access to the justice system. Every year, LAFLA provides free, high-quality legal services to more than 100,000 people living in poverty across greater Los Angeles. Their unique combination of neighborhood offices, self-help centers at courthouses, services and domestic violence clinics puts Legal Aid Foundation of Los Angeles on the front lines in vulnerable communities and at the forefront of change. LAFLA's expert team of attorneys, paralegals, and support staff works to provide direct representation, offer counsel and advice, provide referrals, and educate the community about their legal rights through workshops and seminars. With locations all over LA, you can access their services or volunteer to help no matter where you live. And if you have an urgent issue, call 213-235-0060. That's 213-235-0060. To get legal help, make a donation, or volunteer, visit lafla.org. lafla.org. This is a community call to action from KBLA Talk 1580.
We are back, and in this hour, we're talking about the jury verdict in the Tyree Nichols case, and veteran prosecutor Bobby Grace is here. Bobby, the trial of these three former officers lasted about 17 days. The trial exposed a culture of secrecy and violence within the Memphis Police Department, where officers held to an unspoken agreement that they could punish anyone who fled from them and downplay the violence, that is. The five officers, all of whom are Black, were part of a team within the specialized Scorpion Street Crime Unit, where arrest stats and confiscations were a priority. We know that unit has been disbanded. Tyree Nichols was stopped down the street from his house. More officers arrived. They punched, they kicked him. They propped him up against a police car. He sat in the street for what appeared to be hours, I assume minutes, without medical care before an ambulance. The federal prosecutors, they had former and current Memphis police officers as well as medical staff that testified, including two of the officers that were there that night who turned state's evidence. So you got body cam video, you got other video camera, you got the two people who were there with the five who saying, yeah, it was horrible, I regret it. We used excessive force, but yet the jury comes back with this mixed verdict. Help us understand what happened in this case.
Good evening, Areva. As you point out, this is bewildering. And I can say that out loud. It's a bewildering verdict. Very, very hard to explain. It appears that the jury did not want to hold any of the officers responsible for the murder, the actual murder of Mr. Nichols. They couldn't bring themselves to say that the officers were responsible. All three were responsible for his death. One was found guilty of violation of civil rights as it related to great bodily injury. The others were completely acquitted with respect to the civil rights violence aspect of this.
Let me stop you right there, because I want to break this down frame by frame, because this is kind of a complicated case. First of all, federal criminal charges. How are these charges different than the state murder charges? Let's start there.
Okay, so as you know, there is no murder statute in federal law. So in order to get, let's say, police officers held accountable in a case like this, you have to charge a violation of civil rights that led to someone's death. So basically what the prosecutors for the federal government had to prove to the jury was that Mr. Nichols' civil rights were violated in this incident, that they basically beat him to death, and that is, quote unquote, a violation of his civil rights. Unfortunately, the jury could not bring themselves to agree with respect to all three of the officers that they were ultimately responsible for Mr. Nichols' death. In state court, you would have to prove either intent, i.e., the parties intended to kill Mr. Nichols, or that they committed acts that naturally and probably would lead to Mr. Nichols' death. And we'll get into this, but I would venture to say that they might have an easier time of proving their case on the state side than they did in federal court for a number of different reasons.
And that's what I was going to ask you. So there's no murder charge in federal court, but you can file a civil rights violation case that you violated my civil rights and that violation led to my death. And therefore you get punished like someone, life in prison you can get in federal court. You can even get the death penalty for these kinds of charges if convicted. What is the standard? Because maybe the jury, we respect jurors. We have to. They're the bedrock of our judicial system. Might they have decided that, yes, there was something that went wrong, but it didn't rise to the level of a civil rights violation? Or do you think it's more likely that it says, yes, maybe you violated his civil rights, but the violation itself didn't lead to his death? Help us understand how that could have been the thinking of these jurors.
So I think you kind of laid it out there, Areva. They could have come to the conclusion that Mr. Nichols' rights were violated, but they weren't violated to the extent that death could be caused here. So that's a big issue. And we weren't in the jury room or the courtroom, so we don't know specifically how the federal government argued that each individual officer was responsible in terms of their actions that led to a death, right? And that was one of the problems going way back to the Rodney King case. Rodney King didn't die, but the prosecution had a hard time parsing out with the number of officers that were charged in that particular travesty. Who's responsible for what in terms of leading to injuries that were caused by Rodney King. Here, it appears that the jury could not agree that any of the officers were directly responsible for Mr. Nichols' death. Why is that? Well, unfortunately, there's the argument that you kind of brought up to the last time that we talked about this case, Areva, was that, yeah, there is a tax that people pay when you run from the police, that it's against the law. The police aren't supposed to do that. But I think it's kind of baked into people's heads that, okay, there's certain things that the police should be able to do to you if you run from the police. That could have played a part here. The other thing is, and it appears that the defense attorneys argued that one of the officers who turned state's evidence, that he actually could have been, quote unquote, the aggressor, and that he wasn't sitting there with the other officers. And the jurors may have been, well, hey, where's the guy who we believe is the person who was actually responsible for Mr. Nichols' death? And since he's not here, we're not going to hold all these other people responsible. He ought to be here taking his share of the blame too. So that could be another aspect of it. On the federal side, Areva, sometimes it's very hard to convince jurors who are trained to believe in the efficacy and how officers are supposed to be pillars of our community, that they could hold any one particular officer responsible to the fullest extent of the law for somebody's death. And we've seen that again and again and again across the country in high profile cases, and it appears that it happened again here today.
We know it's a high standard, and we know, as you just said, historically, even getting law enforcement officers charged has been difficult, either at the federal level or the state level. One of the University of South Carolina School of Law professors said that on the mixed verdict, he said prosecutors face an uphill battle in proving the officers violated Nichols' civil rights by causing his death. One of the things they did, the one officer, Haley, who you said was convicted on violating civil rights causing bodily injury, apparently they were able to show the prosecutors him landing a pretty aggressive kick to Mr. Nichols. The other two who were acquitted of all of the civil rights violations cases or charges, apparently there was testimony that they helped to hold him down, but I guess they weren't able to show them delivering a harsh kick. So I'm wondering, in a case like this, and I found this interesting, and I'm glad you're here today because this came out the other day, The defense attorneys played the video every day of this trial. So video that you would have thought they would have run away from because it was so horrific for us lay people to look at it. They played it over and over and over again. And do you suspect that they were doing that because they wanted to show for each of the defendants their individual role? And if they could show, hey, my guy is just here holding him down. He's not throwing, punches. He's not doing this aggressive kicking, that was a part of the defense's strategy?
You hit something kind of the nail on the head here. Oftentimes in charges where a group of people are charged with an offense, it's difficult for prosecutors, and even in civil liability cases, which you know very well about, it's hard to parse out who's responsible for what. All right. And the defense attorneys took a page out again of the Rodney King case and played the tape over and over again. And what that does, Areva, is it lessens the impact that it has on the jury every time that it's played. By the time you finish it and the jurors have seen it 20, 25, 35 times, then, the full weight of what happened to Mr. Nichols is kind of lost. And you're not able to really get the impact of what the group of individuals did to Mr. Nichols that causes death. Now, again, juxtaposing it with what will come in the state court, you have a theory of liability called aiding and abetting. And so in the state court for the second-degree murder charge, the prosecutors will be able to go into court and say, hey, none of these three who are sitting here charged may have dealt the fatal blow, but the holding somebody down is aiding and abetting so that the person who led or gave the fatal blow to be able to strike that blow to cause death. So it may again be easier for the prosecutors on the state side to make their case and to hold all of the officers responsible to the fullest extent of the law.
And I hear what you're saying. Obviously, you have a group of people doing something, but there was evidence that they gave 71 commands, 71 conflicting commands in 13 minutes, like impossible orders for any person to follow, that they were just shouting a barrage of do this, do that, stand up, sit down, put your hands behind your back, put your hands up in the air. And in 13 minutes, imagine someone telling you 71 different things to do, and you can't do any of them. So, of course, it may give the appearance that you are resisting or that you're not complying because they're just shouting commands at you without giving you any time to, follow them. And also, Bobby, there was footage that showed that none of the officers intervened to stop the aggression. Nobody tried to say, hey, guys, that's enough. Let's back out, back up. In fact, there was testimony that one of the officers says, I hope they stomp his ass.
So unfortunately, Areva, there is kind of this kind of gladiator mentality in some police departments around the country where officers are trained to be as aggressive as possible. It appears that this particular unit was trained to be as aggressive as possible, to put a hammer down, if you will, and I'm using it colloquially, put a hammer down on that particular neighborhood in that particular city to try to lessen violence. And police departments, city hall, mayors, city council people get behind that because they're under pressure to lessen violent crime in their particular community. And so oftentimes police departments, and I'm not saying that it's right, they figure, okay, we have to loosen the rules, if you will, to let the police officers do what they will in order to, sit on a particular community to lessen violence. It's not right. It's definitely wrong. One other thing that you pointed out, Areva, was a problem here is that the prosecutors had to prove that these particular officers violated policy in terms of what happened to Mr. Nichols. And the commands that you're talking about can be very confusing to jurors. And I believe that probably what happened here is that the jurors couldn't figure out, well, what was legal, what wasn't legal in terms of police officer training, and did Mr. Nichols not comply? It seems kind of incredible with respect to 70-something commands, but it's probably what they did.
Yeah, it's perplexing that, and like you said, we saw this in Rodney King. That was the case in California where we watched, multiple officers look like they just, were beating Rodney King to death. As you said, he did not die. And there was, a not guilty verdict regarding those 4 officers. But I don't know, it's frustrating as citizens when we watch videotape like that and we see what appears to be clear violations of someone's civil rights. And then for them to have the kind of result, the mixed verdict that we see in this case. When we come forward, we're going to talk about what they were found guilty of, the kind of jail time these officers can face, and what are they likely expecting or should be expecting in their state court trials. Stay with us, KBLA Talk 1580.
More of Areva Martin in real time when we come forward.
I'm Amber Payton. Here's the latest on the Black Information Network. New York City Schools Chancellor David Banks is retiring earlier than expected. Banks, who is Black, originally said he was going to retire at the end of the year, but now his retirement date has been moved up to October 16th. Banks says he was forced to resign by Black Mayor Eric Adams. The move comes after Governor Hochul, who has the power to remove Adams from office, is putting the pressure on the mayor to fill positions with people who are going to be responsible. It comes as federal corruption charges were leveled at Adams and may include more at City Hall. Dock workers in Louisiana are on strike with no end in sight. They want higher pay and a ban on automation, which threatens their jobs. But Louisiana Congressman Steve Scalise says that's not going to happen. He called on President Biden to break the strike because he fears a ripple effect through the economy. The White House, meanwhile, says they are urging the two sides to stay at the negotiation table. That's the latest. I'm Amber Payton on your home for 24/7 News, the Black Information Network.
Delays downtown continue on now the 110 North after 8th Street as the right lane is blocked with a hit and run, and stop delays are coming from Olympic Boulevard, 9th Street interchange. A stall remains in the middle lane of Encino's 101 North at Havenhurst. Slight delay runs heavy still from Van Nuys Boulevard. North Hills has a 2-car accident on the 405 South after Nordoff, blocking the right lane, and heavy traffic continues from Devonshire Street. Brush fire has started in the center divider of Studio Cities 101 North at Highway 134 to Hunga Avenue split, with slowing for 15 minutes from Highway 2 Alvarado Street interchange.
September 15th to 21st is Asthma Peak Week, with the highest concentration of asthma flare-ups and hospitalizations. To become a more active participant in your care, visit luma-edu.com. This message is brought to you by Amgen and AstraZeneca.
Is this the time? This is the KBLA Sports Minute with Ray Richardson.
The lawsuit filed by former USC star running back Reggie Bush against the NCAA, Pac-12 Conference, and USC has taken a strange turn. Bush wants USC to pay for his legal expenses. The former Heisman Trophy winner is suing the NCAA, Pac-12, and USC for money he believes he should have earned under name, image, and likeness guidelines. There was no NIL when Bush played for USC. Bush contends that the NCAA, Pac-12, and USC benefited from his popularity. That might be true, but Bush is in a strange territory, suing USC and asking them to pay for his attorney fees. No response yet from USC, although it is unlikely the school would agree to something like that. Bush won the Heisman Trophy in 2005. He was forced to give it up in 2010 after an investigation revealed he received improper benefits while playing for USC. The NCAA returned the Heisman to Bush in April. No debates, no speculation, just the info you need. That's your KBLA Sports Minute. I'm Ray Richardson on KBLA Talk 1580.
Tabitha Smiley's new book, The Covenant with Black America, 20 years later, is now on sale everywhere. This classic text shot to #1 on the New York Times bestsellers list almost 2 decades ago. If you have the original book, you will surely want to get this 20th anniversary edition with powerful new contributions from today's leading voices. This 20th anniversary edition presents a compelling blend of historical insights and contemporary urgency in this critical and unprecedented election year. Get your copy of The Covenant with Black America 20 years later today. Climate justice, climate equity, climate resilience. By any other name, we demand environmental justice in 2024 and beyond. We're KBLA Talk 1580, and we don't black down.
This truck season, think about all the things you can do in a Chevy truck. You can even just with impressive towing, incredible bed and tailgate functionality, and multiple powertrains. Chevy Silverado, the first ever Silverado EV, Colorado and Tahoe have what you need to get things done. When you want to do it all, Chevy's got you. It's Chevy truck season. Get 0% financing on all 2024 Silverado 1500 pickups when you finance with GM Financial. Chevrolet, together let's drive. 0% APR for 36 months. Monthly payment is $27.78 for every $1,000 you finance. Example down payment 9.3%. Must finance with GM Financial. Some customers may not qualify. Not available with lease and some other offers. Take new retail delivery by 10/31/24.
My mom has taken up going to the park to practice yoga.
My dad's going to a club, but not a book club, a salsa club.
Finding new hobbies comes with age.
My mom has started getting lost and not knowing where she's going.
Becoming lost or disoriented doesn't. Confusion with time or place may be a sign of Alzheimer's. An early diagnosis can help improve the quality of life for your loved one. Learn the warning signs of Alzheimer's at 10signs.org. Brought to you by the Alzheimer's Association and the Ad Council.
This is KBLA Talk 1580. Talk radio. That's music to your ears. We're unapologetically progressive. KBLA Talk 1580.
We're back, and Bobby Grace, veteran prosecutor, is joining me as we are trying to make sense of this mixed verdict that came down today in the federal civil rights violation trial of the former officers involved in the beating death of Tyree Nichols, a 29-year-old Black man who was beat by 5 former Memphis police officers in January of 2023. Everyone was expecting convictions for all of the 3 officers across the board, but that wasn't what happened. So I want to ask you, Bobby, do you think the prosecutors made a mistake? Let me read something to you. The video footage was a key piece of evidence. I talked about that, the fact that the defense lawyers played that video footage every day of the trial. A lot of folks, that was counterintuitive because they thought that video was damning, but they used the footage to poke holes in the government's account of the beating and to deflect blame for Nichols' death. Attorneys for each defendant used the footage to argue that former officer Martin, who had pled guilty, was the man responsible for the killing blows. The 3 defense teams also called separate police consultants as expert witnesses in use of force. Each of the witnesses, who typically testify in defense of law enforcement, officers accused of wrongdoing, testify that the defendant's actions were appropriate and consistent with national policing standards. So let's start with this, showing the video every day and each defense lawyer using the video to show that it wasn't their client, but it was this guy, Martin, that guy over there that took the plea deal.
Well, the prosecutors couldn't run away from that because that's their main piece of evidence.
But wait a minute, Bobby, should they have not pled Martin and the other officer out? Should they have forced them to go to trial?
Well, we talked about this early in the other segment. That seems to be a key factor that the defense team argued that, hey, the person who's really responsible for all this, he took a plea deal, but he's the one who actually was dealing the most blows that could be termed as fatal or leading to somebody's death. So you always have to be careful as a prosecutor in terms of any kind of group activity that you're trying to charge people with. If you're picking and choosing who is going to be the person that you're going to let turn state's evidence to testify for you. And clearly the strategy here was to make this guy Martin, the person who was really responsible for the whole thing. And hey, jury, the fact that the prosecutors chose to deal with him as opposed to everybody else, there's something fishy going on here. So definitely there was jurors who bought that argument from the defense.
Wow. So what they were, all three of them were charged with witness tampering, because we heard throughout this trial about all the lies, all the cover up, everything they did to hide what they did. There's an FBI agent who testified. He said he interviewed two of these former officers and that they admitted fault. He said that they also admitted that they had been untruthful in previous accounts of the beating. And it was those false statements that led to the witness tampering charges and the charges for which they were convicted of. I'm just still having a hard time wrapping my brain around, you believe that they lied, you believe that they tampered with witnesses, but yet you weren't willing to hold them accountable on the violations. And we know sometimes jurors will do what we call split the baby. Like, well, we're not going to let you just walk free because you obviously did something wrong, but not convict them on the more serious charges. But talk about this witness tampering. How serious is that?
Well, it appears that they could get up to 20 years in state prison for witness tampering. And basically what is goes back to Areva is what we call the blue wall of silence. And so oftentimes officers are accused of getting together and making up stories or being unwilling to tell the truth with respect to something that happens where there's a group of officers involved in alleged wrongdoing. Here, that particular law is designed to stop officers from being able to do that type of activity. And the federal government specifically wrote the law in order to make sure that they had an avenue to go after all of the officers who may be responsible for, quote unquote, covering up a crime or trying to encourage other people not to come forward to say what was the truth in a particular instance. All of them are going to be facing the possibility of at least 20 years in prison. I believe I heard one of the family members of Mr. Nichols say that he felt gratified, and he was sure that he thought that the officers would do some time in prison with respect to that particular charge.
Now, two officers pled guilty, Emmett Martin, who became the fall guy, and Desmond Mills. So they testified on behalf of the prosecution. Emmett Martin was pretty stoic during his testimony, said that he thought that Tyree Nichols got what he deserved. However, Mills cried during his testimony. He apologized for his role. He said, look, I made his child fatherless. I'm sorry. I know sorry can't bring him back. I thought that crying, emotional testimony from Mills, Bobby, was surely going to be, that smoking gun kind of evidence.
Yes and no. Again, I don't think that the juries gave full faith and credit to either Martin or Mills' testimony as it related to what happened with these particular three officers. And I'll tell you why. The jury probably felt that these guys were taking a deal and that they weren't going to be taking the full responsibility for what they did, as opposed to the other three. And so that a lot of times that happens in both federal and state court cases when prosecutors are using individuals who appear to have been neck deep into whatever alleged crimes are being prosecuted. Sometimes jurors want everybody to face the same thing, and that didn't happen here. The two officers, turned state's evidence. They testified. Perhaps maybe that they shouldn't have testified. Maybe they should have taken their deal, and the prosecutors should have just stuck with the evidence that they had without having commentary from former co-defendants. We don't know how that would have played out, but hindsight is 20.
How significant are these police experts in these kinds of cases, Bobby? Because in this case, The three defendants had all separate police consultants that testified. One of the defense experts said that if it had been him at the scene, he would have been screaming, "Hit him harder, hit him harder." Now, of course, the experts for the prosecution said that these were violations of not only Memphis's police policies, but they were clear examples of use of excessive force. So how important do these experts become? Because you have dueling experts. This guy is standing there saying, hey, if I was there, I'd have said kick his butt more. And then you have someone for the prosecution saying absolutely positively not. This was a clear violation. So you have jurors having to decide, right, which of these experts are more credible.
So in all these violation cases, Areva, the police experts are the whole ballgame. They get paid a lot of money. They testify all over the country, and they come in and they have the air of authority, air of expertise, and they explain to the jurors, based upon their X number of years of experience, and the hundreds of times that I've looked at these types of events, that these particular officers were right to do what they did because you had a individual that was still resisting arrest. Different departments around the country, and this is a problem that there's no clear national standard here. Different departments say you can use this amount of force when you're trying to restrain someone. You can use this amount of force in Texas. You can use this amount of force in California. You can use this amount of force in Delaware. And these experts can make it very confusing for jurors to figure out, okay, what is actually the right standard that I should be using here. It would take someone who was an expert in police training and stuff to figure this out. And I don't know how you could expect a jury of lay people to come to a decision when you have, so many people giving their opinion as to what's appropriate, what's not appropriate.
Bobby, we'll never know this, but I just wonder how much of this verdict is a reflection of where this country is today. There was a real fervor, I'll call it, when George Floyd was murdered by Derek Chauvin and those other officers. And there was a sense that, cops needed to be held accountable. We need to prosecute them. We need to convict them. They need to go to jail. And then we saw the pendulum swing. We couldn't get the George Floyd and policing federal statute passed. We saw a lot of cities that talked about, shifting resources from police, shifting it back to police. We saw a lot of talk about trying to weaken police unions. We saw progressive prosecutors who were elected to address systemic racism in our system be recalled. Many of them then lose their seats. So there seems to be this swing in the country away from this notion that police officers should be held accountable. And whenever we have this fear mongering about rising crime, even the liberal folks start to think, oh yeah, we need more dollars in police and we need to give police more power. So I'm just wondering how much of this verdict is a reflection of the change and the mood of folks in this country, because I just don't see where folks that convicted Derek Chauvin, the video in that case, so compelling. In some ways, Tyree Nichols was worse. I mean, I don't want to compare trauma to trauma, but what we saw in Tyree Nichols was horrible. We'll never know the answer to that question, but that is a question that's kind of plaguing me at this moment. I'm sure lots of folks are asking that question. When we come forward, these officers, two of them say they're changing their guilty plea in state court to not guilty. This pronouncement was made even before the jury verdict today. So we're talking about what we can expect to happen in state court. And now I would imagine these three men may be more emboldened to think that they can actually win their cases in state court by pointing the finger at this former officer, Martin. Stay with us, KBLA Talk 1580.
You're listening to Areva Martin in real time on KBLA Talk 1580.
Tips to help improve basic steps for building a budget in 2024. Building a budget can help you achieve and reach your financial goals. With a budget, you can keep track of your spending, avoid and get out of debt, limit overspending, pay bills on time, and build solid savings habits. What's the best way to get started? Figure out how much to set aside for expenses like rent, mortgage, bills, groceries, and entertainment. Understanding your past financial habits can help you make the proper adjustments for your budget. Adjusting to a budget can take time as you work to find the right balance, but keep working on it. For more financial health tips, visit chase.com or stop by a local branch. This segment is sponsored by JP Morgan Chase & Company. With reported hate crimes rising in recent years, California has responded through outreach efforts across state government and in collaboration with community-based organizations for the launch of CA versus Hate. This non-emergency, multilingual hate crime and incident reporting hotline provides an anonymous reporting option for victims and witnesses of hate acts reported in 15 different languages through the online portal and in over 200 languages when calling the hotline. Report anonymously by calling 833-866-4283, Monday through Friday from 9 a.m. to 6 p.m. or online at any time at cavshate.org. To help combat climate change, LADWP is helping neighborhoods have better access to electric vehicles by awarding nearly $130 million in EV rebates to customers just like you. From big savings on used EVs to building new charging plazas, LADWP is charging ahead to help all Angelinos experience the benefits of EVs. Get rebates of up to $4,000 for a used EV and $1,750 for a charger. Learn more at ladwp.com/EV. That's ladwp.com/EV.
And that chill in the air means one thing. It's truck season!
Just 5 more minutes.
No snoozing. You've got so much to do. So do it all in a Chevy Colorado or Silverado, including the HD or class-leading 440-mile range of the Silverado EV.
Wait, what? Are you talking?
Yes! Picture it. Work, play, hauling gear, off-roading. A Chevy truck can take whatever you can throw at it, including tailgating in an actual tailgate!
I mean, homecoming is just around the corner. Oh, and showing up in a new truck.
Yes, that's what I'm talking about.
Yeah.
Get things done and look good doing it.
Okay, I'm up. I'll talk to you tomorrow.
Without offering me a ride? That's cold.
It's Chevy truck season. Head to your local Chevy dealer and get 0% financing on all 2024 Silverado pickups when you finance with GM Financial. Chevrolet, together, let's drive.
0% APR for 36 months. Monthly payment is $27.78 for every $1,000 you finance. Example down payment 9.3%. Must finance with GM Financial. Some customers may not qualify. Not available at least in some of the offers. Take me retail delivery by 10/31/24.
Hey, LA residents, it's planting season and the perfect time to get shade trees growing around your home. LADWP and City Plants are giving every resident up to 7 free trees. That's right, 7 free trees delivered right to your door. Trees are great for the environment, help improve air quality, and can help you save on your bill when you use less air conditioning to stay cool indoors. Learn more at ladwp.com/free trees. That's ladwp.com/free trees.
As we are talking about the state court trials that are going to happen for the 3 former officers, well, actually, all 5 of the former officers involved in the beating death of Tyree Nichols, there's some breaking news, Bobby. Today, George Gascon, the district attorney in Los Angeles County, has just announced he's going to review the murder convictions of the Menendez brothers. This is following this very popular Ryan Murphy docuseries, which provided some additional coverage. We've heard about the Menendez brothers for years. Ryan Murphy's docuseries pretty much concludes that the brothers were guilty of killing their parents for financial gain, but there are others who believe that the judge in the second trial of the Menendez brothers got it wrong, but not allowing the abuse excuse to be introduced. And that now there's some new evidence that Lyle, or one of the brothers, had written to a cousin at the age of 17 talking about abuse by his parents. There are efforts to get the sentences commuted. Even family members of Kitty Menendez, the mother, have written a letter saying that they believe that the boys, the young men, the old men, the men have served enough time. This is a pretty bold move by Gascon 30 days before an election. What do you make of this news that the Menendez brothers case is being reviewed by the district attorney in Los Angeles?
Because Mr. Gascon is my boss, I won't talk about what he's doing per se, but I will talk about it generally. So Areva, that there's been back and forth about the Menendez case for several years with different parties, as you described, trying to advocate for the Menendez brothers and trying to get their case reviewed, trying to get some sort of resentencing. In fact, earlier this year, there was a big announcement by one of the local wrongful conviction units, or what we kind of also call innocence projects, talking about that they were going to delve into the case and see what they could do. I think you hit the nail on the head in terms of kind of what's going on around the case. You have two individuals who killed or ostensibly killed their parents. There's the issue of child abuse. And how does that play in? Do you feel that that mitigates what they did? Or does it play into revenge, actually? Was there any allegation that either of them had been sexually abused at any time close to the time that they committed the murders? And then the big question is, how does that play out with respect to the killing of the mother? Was there any, excuse, as you put it, in the world in terms of killing her? So these are all things that the public is thinking about. These are all things that legal experts are thinking about. And it'll be very interesting to see how this plays out coming in the next 30 to 45 days. It'll be very interesting.
Well, let me ask you this. Is it typical in a trial like this where brothers or anyone is claiming that they did something because they had been sexually abused for years? Would that kind of testimony typically be admissible in a criminal trial?
It depends. And again, it would depend upon how close in time were the allegations of sexual abuse. Is it true, even true to the level that a judge would say, oh, I'm going to allow that evidence to go to the jury? The Menendez brothers did not testify to it, and there were no other individuals that
now that's in the second trial, right? And again, I'm getting this off the docuseries. Yes. In the docuseries, in the first trial where there was a hung jury, they both testified, and they testified about the abuse. And then in the second trial, only one was allowed to testify, and the judge refused to allow the testimony about the sexual abuse.
That's what I'm saying, that in the second trial, the judge didn't feel that there was sufficient evidence to warrant any of them talking, or at least talking about the sexual abuse. So it's the Menendez case is just like, one-off. It's very rare that children kill their parents under these types of circumstances. And it's very rare that individuals who are sexually abused, that there's no other independent evidence that would play out or point out that somebody had been sexually abused. And generally, Areva, most prosecutor offices around the country would give credence to the fact that individuals charged with murder or charged with a violent crime who had been sexually abused, they would factor that in terms of some mitigation going forward. So again, the Menendez case just stands out on its own, and it's very just sensational on its own, but the facts of it are just not common.
All right. We're going to watch to see what Gascon does with that case. And Kim Kardashian has weighed in on it, and other celebrities have taken sides. Menendez brothers seem to have found a favor on social media, all kinds of social media, post about it and support that they are gaining. We've seen this happen in other high-profile cases. You get a big documentary or a good big docu-series, it draws a lot of attention to a case and causes prosecutors to have to revisit the case. So again, we'll continue to follow this. But back to these 5 officers, former officers, they all have been charged with second-degree murder. They are facing these state charges. 2 of the officers, even before today, Bobby said they were going to change their plea from guilty to not guilty. And what do you think the verdicts today, where none of them were found guilty for violating the civil rights leading to death, might that embolden them to say, hey, we'll throw the dice in state court because we can point to this guy over here named Martin?
Exactly. I think there's a very real possibility that you see all of the ones that are charged on the state side roll the dice and go to trial. Now, that may not be the smart move for them, and I'll tell you why. Typically, federal juries skew more conservative than state juries. Particularly here in California, what I've seen is that people that are called to jury service on the federal side, just a little bit more politically conservative, come from more outlying areas than they do in state courts. So the jury pool that they might have, that they got in the federal trial, might not be the same jury pool that they get on the state side. And as we talked about earlier, the prosecutors may have an easier time charging them for a theory of murder that jurors could wrap their heads around, because they're going to say, look, you have a group of officers who were violating policy. They have the Memphis policy. They'll be able to show the jury what the Memphis policy is. And then you have individuals that are holding this person down while other individuals are doing beating. That's much easier to understand in terms of what we call the aiding and abetting theory, where one person is helping a principal do something. And so it doesn't matter that Martin was the person who did the fatal blow. If they're going to try to take that, if you're holding somebody down while he's doing that, then you're
also responsible.
Yes.
Well, great analysis as usual, Bobby. Thank you. We are out of time. Boy, what an interesting day in terms of legal news. Always glad to have your input on these really big, thorny legal cases. When we come forward, more in KBLA Talk 1580 with the Raw Report. Stay with us.
Thank
so much of the state's economy. Democratic presidential candidate Kamala Harris lost ground to former President Donald Trump in Virginia following their debate last month. A new poll